Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you step by step through the sewing process of the Chataigne shorts by Deer and Doe patterns. There were a couple steps that were a little confusing, and so I'm hoping this video will help clarify those. To get started, you don't need too many items for this pattern. Just enough woven interfacing to cover the waistband, an invisible zipper, and under 2 yards of fabric. I'm using a medium weight twill for these shorts. There are a lot of pattern pieces for the shorts, but considering that there's fake back pockets, front pockets, a waistband, and cuffs, it makes sense. If you're making the pattern as is, skip to the following chapter because I'll be altering the pattern using a sloper next. I'm going to use a pants sloper to make sure these shorts fit really well. If you want to learn the process of making a sloper, check out my video linked above. The first step is to remove the seam allowances of the pattern, creating a copy in the process. The second step is to remove any darts, pleats, or gathers so the pattern's dimensions are the same as the final sewn pieces. The third step is to temporarily combine pieces into one singular piece to make it easier to alter. Now it's time to use the sloper. Make sure to close up any darts in your sloper before using it with this pattern. I then lined up my sloper with the pattern at the crotch, making sure the grain lines matched up. I wanted to maintain the same ease the pattern called for, so I measured the difference between the pattern and my sloper to see how far out to trace my sloper. Once the pattern shape has been altered, make sure to true the pieces. Now the pieces can be disassembled, besides the pocket piece, and traced on muslin. I always cut the muslin with a large seam allowance in case I need to alter the pattern significantly, and make sure to preserve the seam line with a basting stitch. This comes in handy later. Any alterations are sewn in a different color thread and marked so the entire muslin can be taken apart and changes traced back onto the pattern. My altered back piece is very different from the pattern, but the front pieces match pretty well. Once you're happy with the alterations, the seam allowances are added back in and you're ready to sew. The first step of sewing the shorts is to secure the box pleat on the front pieces. Then the front pockets need assembly. There's 2 pieces. The first is called the facing and is sewn onto the front shorts pieces at the curve. There's no directions to finish the seam, but I serged after notching. The second pocket piece is then sewn to the pocket facing to create the pocket. To secure these pieces, they're basted to the front piece along the top and side. Now we move on to the fake back pockets. Each pocket is sewn together, seam allowances are trimmed, and corners are cut before the pocket is turned right side out and top stitched. The top edge of the pockets must be finished because it will be exposed after sewing. The pocket is sewn onto the back short pieces by top stitching. Next, let's partially assemble the leg pieces by taking a front and back piece and sewing the inseam. Now, match back to back and front to front and sew the crotch seam with right sides together. Next is assembling the waistband pieces with the interfacing. I've recently started trimming the interfacing down to ensure it doesn't stick out if it doesn't line up perfectly with the fabric. Sew the two back waistband pieces together, then sew them to the back leg pieces. If you're sewing version B, you will sew the 4 waistband pieces together instead. The seam needs to be pressed so the seam allowance will be hidden when the waistband lining is sewn on. Now attach the front waistband piece. I found this to be rather tricky, but marking the pivot point helped a little. Sew the first half of the waistband, then carefully pivot the fabric so both pieces are lined up. The first time I did this, material was caught under the foot, creating bunching, so I had to redo this seam. My point still didn't line up perfectly, but that's okay. Now the side seam can be sewn that will not have the zipper. Moving on to the side with the zipper, there's a mark on the pattern where the zipper should end, which is helpful for placement. I like to base the zipper in first just to make sure both sides are even. Then switch to invisible zipper foot and sew until you reach the zipper head. Once the zipper is installed, you can sew the rest of the side seam, press flat, and finish the seams. I didn't line the waistband seams up evenly, but I didn't feel like it was worth ripping out the stitches. At this point, we're almost done with the shorts. The waistband lining pieces need to be sewn together, except for the sides that interface with the zipper. Instead of waiting to finish the seam, I chose to press, notch, and sew the seam allowance before sewing the waistband lining to the shorts. With right sides together, pin the waistband lining to the waistband, making sure the zipper will be encased in the seam near the top of the shorts. Sew along the sides and top of the waistband. Then trim the waistband corners and flip the lining so it's on the inside of the shorts. To secure the lining, stitch in the ditch. This is why I finished the seam before this step, because now I don't need to worry about making sure the seam is enclosed while sewing from the right side. The cuffs are the last part that need to be sewn using a machine. There's a front and back pattern piece, so take one of each and sew them together along the sides to create a circle. Fold the cuff in half and with right sides out, pin the cuff to the wrong side of the bottom of the shorts, making sure the raw edges are all facing the same direction. Sew the seam and finish it. There's no directions to finish the seam, but it's important because the seam allowance will be somewhat exposed. Now flip the cuff so it's on the right side of the shorts. It will be secured later. There is some hand sewing in this project. To start, there's no directions to add a clasp, but I hand sewed one in to make the zipper look more finished. My top edges don't line up perfectly, but that's okay. The other hand sewing step is to secure the cuffs. I started with a back stitch, but that took a long time because I had to keep checking that the needle didn't poke through the outermost layer of the cuff. So I decided to secure the other cuff at 4 points instead. And that's it. You have a very cute pair of shorts. I hope you enjoyed this style of video. If you did, please comment below and I can make more step-by-step sewing videos as opposed to overview videos.